All right, so today's lesson, we're still on topic 1 on biological diversity and survival. And today's lesson, we are specifically looking at this investigation or study that was done with the Galapagos finches by Charles Darwin. So the Galapagos Islands, these are located on the equator in the Pacific Ocean. It's about 1,000 kilometers from the coast of Ecuador, South America. And there's 13 main islands and several smaller islands, and they're all volcanic in origin, and they contain a number of ecosystems. At the lower elevations, the islands are mostly dry. There's bushes, trees, and there's cacti. That's what makes up the vegetation. And then higher elevations, there are humid forests that grow on these higher elevations and on the larger islands. So Charles Darwin was a scientist. He gathered specimens of birds from some of these islands, and he started to notice that there were a large number of closely related finches, but each of which was distinctive species. All right, so they were all finches, but they were different species of finches. So he counted 13 species of finch from the Galapagos, and there was one from the Cocos Island, which was located about 830 kilometers north of the Galapagos. So we're going to look at some of these Darwin's finches and how these islands gave rise to the variety of different species. So in this diagram here, we can see all these different species of finches, and there was different types. There was, for example, ground finches, so they were living more on the ground. Look at their beaks or their bills. They're described here as crushing bills because they were seed eaters. All right, so they needed these larger, stronger beaks to be able to crush seeds. Then there were, for example, warbler finch. They had probing bills, and then tree finches. So these type of finches, they were more insect eaters or maybe cactus eaters. So they had beaks or bills that were adapted for grasping insects. All right, and then here we have a bud eater. So this one here, so eating buds. But the important note here with Charles Darwin's studies is that all of these finches, they arose from a common ancestor. So one common ancestor from the mainland, so the South American mainland, and from that ancestor, all these other finches arose as different species based on the type of island and the type of food that was available to them on those islands. All right, so here just looking a little bit more closely at some of these, we have a large ground finch. Notice the beak. A medium ground finch, we have a small tree finch, and then a warbler finch here. All right, so we are going to watch a quick video here on Charles Darwin and the finches. So we'll start with the first one. It is a brain pop video. Eventually we will have the app working, so you can watch the video, and then there's usually a short quiz to do as well. We don't have the app working yet, so we'll just start by watching the video.
Dear Tim and Moby, who was Charles Darwin? Yours very sincerely, Helen. Charles Darwin was a British naturalist who developed the modern theory of evolution in the 19th century. After early training in medicine and theology, Darwin studied nature, learning about anatomy, geology, and classification. All that study paid off when he signed on for a job on the HMS Beagle. The Beagle sailed to South America in 1831 to map the continent's coastline. The voyage lasted 5 years, during which Darwin collected and studied hundreds of species of plants and animals. His most famous work was done in the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador. Darwin was interested in why mockingbirds were different from island to island. Each bird had a beak that was well suited for the type of food available on its home island. Later, he found that tortoises and finches differed among the islands too. Darwin came to believe that all the finch species must have evolved or changed over time from a common ancestor. He thought that these changes would require a very long time to happen. No, he wasn't the first scientist to think that life forms change from generation to generation. Before he formed his own ideas, Darwin agreed with Jean-Baptiste Lamarck's theory of evolution. Now, according to Lamarck, animals that use a certain body part a lot will develop great strength or size in that part. He believed that these changes would then be passed on to the next generation. Darwin didn't quite see it like that. He believed animals couldn't pass on traits they developed during their own lifetimes. We'll think of it this way. If two, say, bodybuilders have a baby, it won't be born any more muscular than average. According to Darwin, animals have to struggle for resources, like food and land. Their ultimate goal is to live long enough to reproduce. Animals born with advantageous traits are just likelier to live long enough to reach that goal. Those traits will then be passed on to their offspring. Animals with disadvantageous traits are less likely to survive and have kids. So those traits are less likely to get passed on. Well, it's not a very nice system. Darwin called the process natural selection. He said that tiny changes, accumulating over hundreds of thousands of years, would lead to the kind of variations he observed in the Galapagos mockingbirds. In 1859, Darwin published his findings in a book, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. Many people opposed the theory of evolution because it seemed to conflict with their religious beliefs. Oh, no, Darwin never said that humans came from monkeys. He said that people and primates both evolved from a common ancestor. Darwin continued to write and speak about evolution until his death in 1882. He published several more editions of The Origin of Species that expanded on his original theory. Well, it's called the theory of evolution, but a scientific theory isn't just a guess. In science, a theory is an idea that's supported by repeated experimentation and hard evidence. Most scientists today accept an updated version of Darwin's evolutionary theory that includes what we now know about genetics and heredity. Wow, that thing's pretty successful. I fear you have created a monster.
So before I play the next video, I just wanted to just make it clear again there that it's the adaptations that allow for survival that will get passed on. So in that example, there was the two birds. One had the longer beak and was able to get the insect. Therefore, that bird was able to survive. Therefore, that bird will be able to reproduce, and the genes will then be passed on to the offspring. All right, so that is how natural selection works.
What are Darwin's finches, and why are they so important to biologists? The study of finches led to the development of one of the most important scientific theories of all time. But how did this come about? In December 1831, a naturalist called Charles Darwin boarded the HMS Beagle bound on a surveying voyage to South America. Whilst the ship and crew carried out coastline surveys, Darwin was free to explore the islands en route. In 1835, the Beagle arrived at the Galapagos Islands near Ecuador. What Darwin found there surprised him greatly. As well as giant tortoises and marine iguanas, Darwin collected and preserved a variety of different songbirds called finches. Upon returning to the UK, he examined them together with ornithologist John Gould and made some fascinating discoveries. the scientists observed that the birds were all similar to a single type of finch found on mainland South America, suggesting that these mainland finches had originally colonized the island. However, the Galapagos finches were all slightly different from the original mainland species, and they were also different from each other. The finches on each island showed distinct variations in their overall size, beak shape, and claw size. These differences were attributed to the differing food sources available on the various islands of the Galapagos. Some of the birds had long thin beaks and sharp claws suited to catching and eating insects, while others had large powerful beaks suitable for cracking open nuts. Because of the distances between the islands, breeding between different species of finch was unlikely, and Darwin concluded that the finches must have evolved over time from the original mainland species to suit the conditions found on each individual island. In all, 13 of the birds brought back by Darwin were identified as being entirely new species, all similar to each other, but with definite variations from their common ancestor. Darwin proposed that the variations seen both within and between the finch species arose by chance. Variations which gave any individual a competitive advantage made them more likely to survive and therefore reproduce, outcompeting those with less advantageous characteristics. Darwin called this theory natural selection, and he published it in his book On the Origin of Species in 1859. Evolution by natural selection is now widely agreed to be the most accurate theory to explain the origin and diversity of all life on Earth. In this video, you have learned how the finches of the Galapagos Islands led to the development of the theory of evolution by natural selection. Is evolution of these birds still happening? See what you can find out.
Charles Darwin was a famous scientist in the 1800s. He was famous because he came up with an idea that changed the way we think about life on Earth forever: the theory of evolution. Darwin loved animals and studied them all of his life. In 1831, he went on an exciting voyage aboard the ship HMS Beagle. The Beagle visited the coast and islands of South America and Australia, where Darwin observed and collected a wide range of weird and wonderful plants and animals. When he got back to England, he analysed his collection closely. That was when his ideas about evolution started to form. Darwin had found around 15 different species of finch when he was on the Galapagos Islands. He noticed that the birds were similar to other finches in lots of ways, but their beaks were all different shapes. Darwin looked into it further. He realised that the different beaks matched the type of food available on each island. The finches who ate insects had skinny, pointed beaks, so they could pick them up better, and those that ate hard fruits had beaks that were sharp, so they could get through the skin. Darwin decided that there was only one way that this could have happened. The birds must have adapted to their environment over time. This led into another idea, which he called the survival of the fittest. In any environment, plants and animals from the same species show natural variation in their physical characteristics, such as neck length in giraffes. Darwin suggested that those plants and animals best suited to their environment are more likely to survive and pass on their characteristics to their offspring. Over a long period of time, the characteristics of the surviving members of the species will come to predominate. Confused? Take the peppered moth. In London in the early 1800s, 98% of peppered moths had light-coloured bodies. Only 2% were dark. The light moths were very happy because they were the same colour as the trees, which meant that they could easily hide from hungry birds. The dark peppered moths were easy to see and, well, eat. Then came the factories and the smoke of the Industrial Revolution. Many trees turned black with soot, and suddenly it was the dark moths who were able to survive better in their environments. By 1895, the dark peppered moths made up 95% of the population. That's quite a turnaround. The process of natural selection usually takes much longer, but this is a good example of how it works. What about us humans? Good question. Darwin went on to suggest that humans share a common ancestor with modern apes. This was controversial because it went against the religious beliefs of many people. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection had a great impact on the world. Today, it is widely accepted as our best scientific explanation of how life on Earth works.